Hi, John. Thanks for joining us on our podcast. It'll be best if you introduce yourself, so then we can drill down into your area of co-working. And I've got a bunch of questions. I might get through 10% of them. We'll see how we go. But if you can just introduce yourself and the role that you have at Hub.
No, thanks for inviting me. So my name's John Preece. I'm the Chief Property Officer at Hub. What I do on a day-to-day basis is construct new agreements for new locations with property owners around Australia, typically on management agreements with landlords of commercial assets. I also look after the design and the construction of the facilities before we hand off to our excellent operations team to run them. And I also look after the technology team, so technology infrastructure and data platforms and systems at Hub as well.
That's an interesting mix, actually, to manage the commercial real estate and the technology. Is there advantages in having both of those under your umbrella?
Well, there's huge crossover in the physical environment and the technology infrastructure because, of course, the spaces that we provide, we're providing an infrastructure for customers to use. So much of that is built into the physical environment. So in terms of the infrastructure that we build in, there's a natural crossover there with new locations. You build out the platform, you build the technology backbone in there. And then all, of course, the systems that link into that. So by the time you've got your arms around the technology infrastructure, it's not a huge link to jump into the technology systems and data platforms as well.
I asked that question because we work mostly with commercial buildings and more often they're tenants, like the large workplaces.
Yep.
And one of our biggest challenges is not the technology more than the process. So we can... we're an integration platform, so we have hundreds of integrations, but to get access to those things to integrate with is sometimes the challenge where, the real estate service provider might not give us access to the base building access control system and the HVAC system that's all centrally managed for the tenant that wants to include that in their experiences.
Yep.
So it's sort of refreshing to hear that you have like a role that could literally close those gaps if you're working on one of our projects.
Some of those gaps. So there are buildings where we've got control over the entire asset, like Hub Hyde Park, where we're sitting today, and we're the only tenant in this building. So we've got control over the whole asset. And there are others where we're part of multi-tenanted buildings, and we probably bump up against the same challenges that you, particularly around access control and what we can and can't integrate on access control, and also some other systems as well. And
that introduces its own challenges, right? Like, so you're a tenant with your own tenants in a tenancy.
Spot on.
So there's that must be a very unique environment to navigate.
Look, it is, but that's what we do for a business. Yeah. We're a workspace hospitality business, and most of the landlords that we deal with are not that. Landlords are investors. They like to own assets, collect rent, manage the buildings. In terms of getting heavily into the sort of the people-heavy business of hospitality, it's not where they want to be, and that's where we shine. So in terms of the business model, irrespective of our commercial arrangement with an owner, and some of our locations are leased on some of the older locations, but more increasingly now on those management agreements where we partner with owners, it's a recognition that we can bring a skill set that a landlord doesn't have. And in most cases, they don't want to have that either. They're investors in commercial assets. We're a hospitality business, so the skill sets are complementary. And from a capital perspective, owners have access to capital that, a hospitality business like ours doesn't. So again, there's complementary means of not only creating a physical environment, but then operating a space where we can really lean into what we do well, and the landlord likewise.
Yeah, great. Let's zoom out a little bit and talk about co-working as a general model. For me, it comes up as an analogy quite often, like workplaces, the large corporates want a co-working style within their organization, right? And do you see a relationship between like corporate headquarters and co-working, and can these two things work together? What do you think like the enterprise role is in co-working?
It's interesting when you say that there are corporates out there, so we want this to be like a co-working space. I think what they actually want is it to feel like a co-working space.
Yeah.
Lots of people that I tour around our spaces that are getting familiar with the sector, whether they're large occupiers wondering how they can interact with the flexible workspace sector, or landlords looking with a curious eye at what we do. It's a common reaction where they walk in and they go, "Oh, why does it feel like this? My office doesn't feel like this."
Yeah.
And it's that vibrancy of people, it's that hospitality overlay that we've got that makes it feel quite different. So I think when occupiers talk about, we want something like a co-working space, it's that feel that they really want, because it's
the feel and likely the flexibility.
exactly.
So
Right.
the ability to work in multiple locations as if you had multiple offices. I think
network.
that's a advantageous advantage. I think any business, regardless of size, would find value in.
Yeah, and I think particularly on the larger occupiers, they're getting more sophisticated in terms of how they interact with the flex space industry as well.
Yep.
Flexible workspace has been around for decades.
Uh-huh.
Organisations have used it for decades, but generally for overflow space or project space. Whereas now flexible workspace is being brought into a more central role in the corporate real estate strategy. So it's there from day one, and it's not just something that sits on the fringes as a reaction later on. And there's some interesting evolution in terms of particularly very large tenants. We're working with Brookfield on a building in Perth where there's a very large anchor tenant. And one of their requirements for staying in the building, it was a renewal, was that there would be co-working space within the building. So Brookfield said, okay, we'll provide that. And then that's when we did a partnership with Brookfield to operate that co-working space for them. But in that instance, the anchor tenant not only said, we need flex space in the building, we also need the right to take that space up and hand it back. So often you get co-working space in a building, but if the operator's doing their job, they'll probably run that space at or near capacity. So there's no actual flexibility for the tenants in the building to take it up and hand it back. So larger occupiers particularly getting more sophisticated with how they interact with the sector, but then how they can guarantee the usage of that space in their own buildings.
So is their initial thinking is just like, we're downsizing our real estate. So we want an option in case we need, for a special event, we need more space, more desks, more meeting rooms. But if you're then running a co-working space and it's fully occupied, they don't get that flexibility. So what's the value to them in that case?
Well, exactly right. So that's why they've negotiated the rights to take space and hand it back as part of their lease with the owner in that instance.
So shorter lease terms for dedicated space within the co-working environment.
Exactly right. So we've got to hold space for their usage. And that's from an operator's perspective and a landlord's perspective, that becomes quite challenging. But I think that's becoming a real theme now in terms of how particularly those larger occupiers are looking at the amenity suite in the building, the flexibility that they've got in order then that they will sign that lease on a long term with a landlord.
I've seen landlords sort of years ago doing this internally, right? Like they look at their tower and the stack of all the tenants, and they'll see a few gaps in floor plates and be like, okay, there's one floor there that we can't lease to a large organization, so we'll turn that into our own overflow co-working space. But there's, doing it internally doesn't give you the scale of just tapping into like a hub, right? Like if you become a hub member, you can work anywhere at any of the locations. You might have your home base, but you can, there's a lot of flexibility that if you just had it internally, you miss out on that. And then obviously the hospitality angle, focusing on the services and the experience rather than just looking at this as overflow for real estate.
I think that's a common mistake that landlords can make. It's they look at a flexible workspace, they see rooms with desks and chairs, and they think, we can do that. And indeed they can. Anyone can do walls with plasterboard and glass and desks and chairs. That's the easy part. Unfortunately, that's not what people really want to pay for in terms of their workspace. That's one component of it. But all of the amenity that sits around that, the service overlay to make sure that everyone that steps foot in the space, hopefully, touch wood, has a great day at work. And when things go wrong, because they do, they get fixed up really, really quickly. So, the physical environment is only one component, and that's the bit, I love that because that's part of my day-to-day role is design and construction, and I love that. But I also recognise that equally, or I would say more importantly, is the hospitality overlay, because that's the bit that people interact with when they go into that workspace, not necessarily desks and chairs and walls.
Yeah, and that's our experience. Place West, we're a customer of Hub, and we're here in Sydney. And we had our own office, and what I loved about coming here was you get that experience that our customers, our typically large customers have. Like, one of our customers is PwC. They have their own internal catering teams. They have their own front of house staff. They have concierge staff. But for us to have that as a small business, the only real option is coming to a place like Hub. But there's also, large business has this benefit as well, and they don't have to do this internally. Perhaps they can partner with a company that specializes in this and just sort of turns it on for them. What other sort of a misconception I think some people have with co-working is it's only exclusively for small businesses. Are there other misconceptions you see all the time?
Yeah, look, I'd still think there are plenty of people out there that expect to walk into our spaces and see trestle tables and people sipping lattes all day long and sort of kicking back with MacBooks and sort of working but not working. But it's our environment's a very professional work environment. So I'm pleased at what you said before about you as a small business coming here to have all of that amenity that large businesses do, because a lot of our customers say the same thing. Yes, I'm a small business, but I want to attract really good people to my business because that's the way I'll grow my business, and I need to compete. Place OS needs to compete with Price Waterhouse and Minter Ellison for brilliant graduates coming out of uni, and they have these amazing workplaces. And the decision may not be swayed solely on the workplace, but it's certainly a factor. So for a small business to have all of that same amenity and that same service as a larger business certainly puts you on a level playing field. Yeah,
I mean the physical location is definitely part of the work culture, and just having space that you can sometimes get together in. And I think flexible working today is not just like one day I work at home, 3 days I work in the office, and the others I decide on the moment. It's throughout the day, that flexibility of different types of spaces you have access to. And that's what I'm experiencing. Those indirect benefits of having lots of different types of spaces available to me throughout the day. So if I want to make a private phone call, I can go to the lounge area. If I, just want to change location because I'm task switching, I can physically just go somewhere else, right? And then we have our own little space that is ours and we can meet in. I think, that catalog of space that's been exclusively until now for large businesses is now available to smaller businesses. The other indirect benefit to Place OS is we experience the type of technology and services that our customers experience. So we can sort of put ourselves in the mindset of the customer a little bit as well. So we provide concierge interfaces to our customers, for example. So we've never had any concierge services before. So now, when I'm interacting with front desk or picking up a package and things like that, I'm thinking of ideas that can make our own product better because I'm here like experiencing it for the first time. So that's been interesting for us.
Fantastic. Yeah, no, I think flexible work, people naturally focus on the where of work. Where are we working? Are we at home? Are we in an office? Are we somewhere else? But of course, there's the how of work and there's the when of work as well. So, you might work different hours to some of your colleagues because, you're more switched on in the morning than the afternoon or vice versa. The how of work and how you go about your work does also link into where you're located, and your story there of moving through different spaces during a day to keep your mind active because you're doing different tasks, so that it's focused work or phone calls or meetings. You need those different spaces. And then, of course, the where of work is, that's what's hitting the headlines and, return to office or work from home and every binary story around that's flying around at the moment.
Yeah, so it's static, isn't it? It's just blanket policies, not getting to the core of what we used to focus on in workplace, which was activity-based working. Now it's just like, it's like everyone forgot about that phrase and that focus. And it's all about, we're still like stuck in this COVID response mode where we shouldn't be. It should just be like, let's return to the principles of what space do you need for a certain task and what tasks do you perform so you can match that to the spaces individually, collectively, and as a company culture. So it's complicated, right? And it's extremely complicated to have a co-working environment that can meet every tenant's needs for the same space.
It is.
How do you make those design decisions? Is it a mix of gut feeling and data, or do you survey your customers and work out what spaces to have and what to change? And follow-up question to that is, how frequently do you change the designs of your locations?
The short answer is all of the above. So we gather data on the use of all of our spaces, and we've got 15 locations now, which gives us a good data set. We've been around for 13 years, so we've got a good data set, but we also recognise that the data only gives you one component of the story, because our sector and the way our customers use space evolves. So if we built the same space as we did 13 years ago, we'd probably be bankrupt by now. So the sector's evolved, we've evolved, our customers' need for the spaces has evolved. So yes, we've got good data. We do customer surveys In primarily, well, a multitude of forms, but primarily two forms. One is a Net Promoter Score, which we generally run once every 6 months. That gives us a really deep data set, and some of that's interview based as well. We also get, daily real-time customer experience scores from, touch points around our venues that gives us a guide on, how are we traveling literally on a day-to-day basis. But then, of course, we've got to look forward as well. So looking backwards at the data, looking at what the customers are telling us they want today, but then what's going to happen in the future. And that's where getting overseas into different markets, we're looking at different markets where the flex industry is at different point in the cycle than perhaps we are here, to try and get ahead of what comes next and what we might need to develop next in order to meet future demand as well as today. And there are some core functionality things that I could kind of point to that would be fairly consistent, but it's really the amenity and the service offering, which is where we've put a lot of investment over recent years, and we'll continue to do so because that's a real differentiator for us. And
how do you, more specifically, how do you measure the activity in space? Are you tracking people throughout the building? Do you just run surveys and counters and count people going to different spaces? And then how do you sort of understand the experience people are having in different types of spaces as well?
Very good question. So in all of our locations, I know how many people are in each individual location at any point in time in almost real time. There's about a 5-minute lag, but it's almost real time. And we've done that for the last 7 years, and that initially was driven out of compliance. So co-working spaces like ours typically are designed to quite a dense capacity, and typically designed to a higher capacity than a normal office would be. So a normal office might be designed for a maximum of 1 to 10 on occupancy, one person for every 10 square meters. Our spaces will be designed more like 1 to 8 square meters. So we need to track and make sure that our occupancy is not going below or above, depending on your perspective, the 1 to 8 square meters from a compliance perspective. That became really important during COVID when everyone was fixated on one person per 4 square meters. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
We never get anywhere near that, but that's when we introduced displays into all of our buildings so people could physically see how many people are in this space and what that means on a square meter basis. So you'll see that by the front desk. We also then introduced a range of sensors that also deliver us air quality information and also temperature information. So we display all of those metrics around the front desk so people can physically see that. And again, that was partly a response to COVID in doing that to give people comfort so they felt secure when they came into the space. But again, it's one of those data points that customers have regularly pointed to, so we've continued that on.
For us, that trend started just before COVID, where if people remember that time in recent history, that there was bushfires. So Australia went through bushfires and then into COVID. But we're working on projects with Lendlease, and air quality was important because that's something commercial buildings can offer, higher quality air than what you have at home. Because with all the, you don't have completely sealed off windows and doors at home, so you have smoke and pollution coming through. But there's air filtering and lots of high standards when it comes to commercial buildings. Do you do anything with that data in real time? Let's say like air quality is low. Does that just do you just log that somewhere and make long-term fixes, or does it trigger any alerts, or do you have plans around that?
So that's straight through the facilities team, which also sits under my remit. I must say, we haven't had issues with air quality, but like the density, if the density went awry, we'd get an alert, we'd be able to action it immediately and then work out what the long-term solution looks like. Like I say, fortunately, we haven't had those issues. We did do a lot of work on all of our AC systems in and around COVID, again, with the potential transmittal through air conditioning systems where we couldn't get a straight answer whether that was true or false or somewhere in between. So we went with it's probably true and took some actions around that, some of which we had direct control and some of which we partnered with our landlord to make sure that they did. So we're in a fortunate position that we haven't had those issues yet, but certainly we'd be getting the alerts through if we did.
We're getting low level here, but it's an area that I'm interested in. Like one of our customers is ASHRAE in the US, and they set the standards for air quality and the HVAC members community. So all of their customers are facility managers. We do their head office in Atlanta, and one of the challenges we saw was like measuring air quality at where the air conditioners are versus where people are, and like the difference can be quite significant.
Yeah.
So like even it all comes down to quality of data, not just the data input. Is it true or false, or is it a false positive? But what is it actually telling us based on where the sensor's located? And there's such a ripple effect when it comes with all this technology. And when you do it at scale, that's even more complicated.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's an area we're trying to solve for many of our clients, but it has a lot of built-in challenges.
Yeah.
Let's get back to more high-level questions and air quality sensors. What's the landscape like with co-working at the moment? And how do you justify your existence versus all the other players out there? And is there room for everybody? Is the first question, or conversely, is it an underserved market? Is there room for more players to emerge, or more market share to be gained?
So here in Australia, the flex space, and it depends whose piece of research you read, but flex space as a percentage of overall office stock in the country is somewhere between 2.5% and 3%. Mm-hmm. So it's still relatively small. As a data point, Singapore and Hong Kong are more like 5-6%. If you go to a market like London, 13% is the latest piece of research I read there. And then there's a whole range through US cities, that would go from 3% up to sort of 7, 8, 9%.
Does any of that data include the growth, like the year-on-year growth in that area? Because I imagine in all markets will be growing in market share since COVID.
Yes, but also you've got some operators, unfortunately, that have gone broke or have scaled back.
Yes.
So some of that is offset. So yes, you are seeing...
If you ignore the elephant in the room, the WeWork, but if you look at everything else as the data input, I would imagine it's growth.
Yeah, that's right. It's growing. Demand is very robust. Demand now versus pre-COVID is significantly higher, which is a good thing. There's also more operators, and that's where you're getting the growth out of the sector. So here in Australia, I'd say it's an underserviced market when you look at it in a global context. Mm-hmm. And even just anecdotally with the demand, most operators in Australia are fairly open when we speak to each other around how we're seeing demand, and it's good. So there's room for growth on a demand basis. So you don't grow just because the percentage number looks less than London, but you've got good demand and we look underserved. I was looking at the data for Perth recently, and that's about 1.5% of office stock. So it's wildly underserved over in Perth. So that's why we're delighted to be opening there soon. But underserved, I would say. We are seeing more overseas operators coming into the market, and some of the smaller local players like ourselves, are really experiencing a period of growth. So.
Is there a barrier to entry for those overseas players coming here because of the relationship with the owners of the buildings? Is very local, right? Like a lot of the building industry is sort of run by super funds in a way, right? And they're all local and investment arms.
As the commercial model for flexible workspaces is evolving, that is definitely the case. And I caveat it like that because when organisations were signing leases with landlords, within reason, provided there was a bank guarantee there, a landlord would sign a lease with anyone. And sometimes there was an attraction with an exciting overseas operator dropping into the market and a point of difference for the building. Not all operators, but many now are transitioning to partnerships and management agreements. Mm-hmm. And when a landlord has to partner with an organisation, often they want to look them in the eye. They want to understand what the business is about. They want to understand how they can really draw the benefit from that operator beyond the flexible workspace. So what else can you do? Can you manage shared amenities, meeting and event spaces, food and beverage, concierge services, etc.? What else can you do for us? And it brings a different tone of conversation that then does lead to if I'm going to partner with this organisation, I need to trust them and I need to have access to the senior people in their business. I don't really want to go through a tortuous path that takes me from Sydney to Singapore to London to get a response here. I just want to look someone in the eyes, get things done in my particular asset. So I think the landlords are looking at it with a different lens on the commercial construct, but also just at a real base level. Like I say, we've seen operators that have scaled back, that have handed keys back, that have unfortunately gone broke. Mm-hmm. And that's not a reflection on the sector, that's a reflection on individual operators and how they approach their business. And landlords are looking at that now and going, okay, well, irrespective of the commerce here, like, will this company be around in 24, 48 months? And do I want them in my asset? So, yeah, there's a different lens on flex space operators today than I would have said, 4 or 5 years ago.
And I'm saying that partnership with the landlords is what's sort of new. Am I wrong in that? Like, it's like that WeWork model was just buying or leasing space, and then subletting it. As a simple model, really. But if you then have to have so much money to get those leases, and you're locked into those long-term leases, where now this model of partnering with landlords is saying, well, what tenants do you have? What do they want? How can we help you serve them with our hospitality focus and enable some of your vacant space? The buzzword is activate your vacant space. That's a different collaborative model that I think is might be slower growth compared to the older models, but safer and long-term focused.
Yeah, more sustainable.
Yeah.
And in terms of landlords entering those partnerships, look, they're responding to demand from their tenants as well. So the anchor tenants coming into the buildings expect a level of amenity and service now that perhaps they didn't 4, 5, 6, 7 years ago. Landlords need to respond, and that's where the partnership model comes to the fore. Now, partnerships are not new in a global sense. Through Europe and the US, management agreements for flexible workspace have not been uncommon. It's relatively new here in Australia, and I think there's still some owners looking at it with slightly suspicious eyes. But the more operators that do this and the more success that they have under these partnership models, then it becomes more of a normality. And the hotel sector went through a similar phase during the early days of hotels. Hotel operators used to own their buildings, then worked out that they probably weren't asset owners, they were operators and hospitality businesses, and the dynamic shifted. And by and large, now hotels would, generally speaking, they're on management agreements. There's an owner that owns the asset, and there's an operator with a brand that runs the operation. The flex space sector seems to be evolving and maturing in that direction as well.
Yeah, that's an interesting analogy, because it's like one of the main things the brand is managing is getting people booking the hotel, right? So, and that customer relationship. So that's a lot of value you can bring to the landlords that are, they're just, their expertise is in the physical location, the physical building. And but yeah, I mean, this also has challenges, and we've touched on it already with not being able to access certain building systems, sub-building systems. Hotels have that same problem. We've worked with some hotels, and it's getting access to things outside the island of technology that they have is difficult, and it's not uniform globally, which is the other challenge. You might work it out for a certain location, but then you go to a different city and it's a whole new range of technology and vendors that you have to work with and integrate with.
Yeah.
Look, I think we've covered a lot of territory. What do you think is next for co-working? What's sort of what do you see as the long-term growth for Hub, or just in general the industry?
Yeah, so for Hub, look, I think for the industry generally, there's a really positive story at the moment. Like I say, robust demand across, I'll speak to Australia, robust demand across the Australian markets, and a comparatively small existing sector at 2 to 3% of stock, which gives plenty of room for headway. So I think there's a positive story here in Australia. In terms of Hub and our growth, look, we've made the pivot to become a service provider to landlords, to property owners, to partner with them to provide workplace solutions for them and their tenants. Yes, that will be flexible workspace. That's what we're known for. We're a building hospitality company. But increasingly, we're being asked to manage more of those shared amenities as landlords build them out. Meeting and events, food and beverage, business lounge, concierge, end-of-trip facilities, gymnasiums, all of those other components that are built into new developments and assets these days that need that service layer added to them. Yeah. And the brand position that you just mentioned there with the hotels is also evolving in the workspace sector. And landlords recognising that their own brand has value to occupiers, and that a workspace brand is increasingly important as occupiers choose landlords and operators of assets for their workspace, because it's they're big decisions now. They need to be an attractor for their employees to come. The mandate things don't seem to have worked roundly, and the workspace therefore has to be an attractor. And there are a multitude of layers in how you make a workspace attractive for an employee to want to go there. But certainly having a great physical space and fabulous service and good amenity are three components of that would give you a firm foundation.
One thing I should have touched on earlier actually is how does energy reduction and energy savings or net zero targets play into your strengths as co-working? Is it more advantageous to have a co-working model because you would assume it's using space on demand, therefore energy on demand, right?
It is, and also the density point that I mentioned earlier. So using space at a higher density. So if you've got a resource that you can use more intensively, intuitively, that makes sense. So you've got more people using the same space. So instead of air conditioning and lighting a 2,000 square metre floor and 20 people turn up on a day, if you can have 200 or 400 people in that same space, then you're using that energy in a much more energy efficient manner just by virtue of more people using the same resource. So there's a foundation in co-working that kind of works from a sustainability perspective, not just from energy, but also when you build a flexible workspace like this, a customer moves in and they move out, another customer moves in. You don't refit the whole space. You reuse the fit out that is in the space. Whereas in a traditional office sector, you would strip the space out, you'd make it good. Next tenant moves in, they do a fit out, they move out, you strip it out, put it into landfill. I mean, it's horrible.
A lot of wastage.
The whole leasing fit out, it's just terrible from an ESG perspective.
Yeah.
So there's a lot in co-working that actually is inherently sustainable. And then of course we do the same things that everyone else does in terms of trying to reduce our energy consumption through making sure that the building is tuned properly, making sure it's designed properly, and for Hub we also offset all of our carbon, so our spaces are all carbon neutral, and we're also carbon neutral at a business level as well. So any customers that use our spaces have got a free kick on carbon neutrality on their workspace in any event.
Yeah, there's always like low-hanging fruit, easy wins when it comes to energy that sort of common sense but not common practice, like that simple thing of consolidating people to one area for higher density so you can turn other things off. That's such a simple message, but it's something, at Place OS we've been educating our corporate tenants on. Like, if you still have your 10 floors and you're only running at 30% utilization, why are you using all 10 floors? Let's move people into the same area, and you can just use your other floors as overflow when you need to. That's where technology helps for the reservation systems and the live real-time tracking.
Completely. And also, yes, that is sustainable and that is the best reason to do it. But also from the people coming into that space. Where we started this is like, why does it feel like this? Well, it feels like this because there's people, right? So you want to consolidate the people into one area because it feels better.
100%. It's exactly what sold me when I did the tour here in Sydney was I was the only one working in the office that I walked from in Surrey Hills. And I came here and there was a buzz of activity. And I'm like, oh, this would be what I walk into every day instead of walking into an empty office where I'm just like alone and, not celebrating wins with anyone or
might as well stay home.
Exactly. Might as well stay home or like work anywhere else, like at a cafe or something. But great. This has been a great conversation. Thanks for joining us.
Fantastic. Thanks for the invite. It's been fabulous.
Thanks, John.